It's time for another episode of Let's Talk Business South Carolina, featuring industry outlooks, panel discussions on trending topics, and interviews with business executives, community leaders, and government officials. And now, coming to you from the Drum Creative Studio, here's your host, longtime South Carolina business publisher, Rick Jenkins.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Business South Carolina. This is episode number 28. I'm your host, Rick Jenkins, and as always, we're coming to you from the Drum Creative Studios. In March of 2020, COVID hit. For quite some time, it changed how many of us lived our lives both at home and at work. Most every industry was impacted, some more than others, of course. The workplace and how our jobs were structured in some cases changed dramatically. And because all industries experienced change to some degree, there weren't many impacted more than the staffing industry, since they work with all the industries. When I refer to staffing, that includes companies that provide services such as talent acquisition, HR consulting, training and development, and employee retention strategies as well. Let's face it, employers used to have all the leverage in the boss-worker relationship, but then that changed somewhat during COVID, and employees suddenly had leverage themselves. But as we begin 2024, it seems that employers and employees are preparing themselves for, we'll call it a relationship reset. We're going to talk about that today and discuss current workplace trends in general with a representative from Malone Staffing Solutions. Plus, executives from HTI and Draexlmaier are here to talk about their longtime partnership and how they work together to improve employee retention. Before we get into those conversations, we're going to hear about a few upcoming major regulatory laws that will impact employers in 2024. And here to help me with that conversation is Katie Busbee. She's an attorney in the employment law practice at Haynsworth Sinkler Boyd, a law firm with 4 offices in South Carolina that provides business litigation and a host of other legal services. Katie has been with the firm for 2.5 years, and she is a graduate of the University of South Carolina. Katie, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Rick.
It is good to have you here. Are you from South Carolina, by the way?
I am. So I'm from Columbia originally.
Okay.
Yeah.
Born and raised?
Yes.
Born and raised, okay. And you are a Gamecock?
I am a Gamecock.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. I appreciate you joining us. And first of all, before we go any further, I just want to thank Haynsworth Sinkler Boyd for partnering with us on this show today to help us provide this content for our viewers. So we really appreciate it. I want to ask you about a few things before we get started. You are a part of the employment law team, correct? And how many people are on that team, Katie?
So we have 5 people, I think, right now on the team. So
Yep.
we have some people that focus on just general employment law, kind of bread and butter issues.
Right.
We have an immigration team as well that's also in our employment practice group. And so, yeah, we kind of cover the whole employment labor law world.
Right, gotcha. As I mentioned, there are, in the intro, there are a few upcoming major regulatory laws that will impact employers this year. And so I just kind of want to run through those 3. I'm going to tee you up a little bit and you tell us about them. The Department of Labor established new thresholds for when employees become exempt from receiving overtime pay. Get us up to speed.
Yes, so the Department of Labor announced a new rule last year that we expect to go into effect sometime this spring. And basically they are raising the salary thresholds at which point employees move from being non-exempt from receiving overtime pay to exempt. So under the Fair Labor Standards Act, if you meet certain salary threshold requirements and duty requirements, you don't have to be paid overtime under federal laws. And so they are actually increasing that salary level from about $684 a week to $1,059 a week. So it's quite a jump. I mean, it's over a 50% increase, and the Department of Labor thinks it's going to affect about 3.5 million workers.
Wow.
Yeah.
The Federal Trade Commission, they proposed a new rule on banning non-competes. I know that is going to impact quite a few folks. Tell me about that.
Yes, so the FTC announced this rule last year. It caught a lot of headlines. We had a lot of employers calling us right away, very worried about their non-compete agreements. And basically, under the proposed rule, it would ban all non-compete agreements. And then it would also ban any kind of provision that functions as a de facto non-compete. So if you have a confidentiality provision or a non-solicitation that is so broad that it would prohibit that employee from working when they separated from the employer, it would also ban those provisions as well. And it would actually even require employers to go back to all the people that they have non-competes with and let them know that those are no longer enforceable. Right. So I want to say that this is a proposed rule still, but the FTC has announced that they expect a final rule or a final decision this spring. So nothing in stone yet, and we do expect that it'll be challenged in court and that a court will have the final say.
For lack of a better way to put it, that can be a real pain, or it could likely be a real pain if that passes through.
It could, yes.
National Labor Relations Board, there are some new decisions that came down from them.
Yes, so they had a very busy year in 2023, and so I wanted to just hit on a couple decisions that came out that affect both employee handbooks and severance agreements. So just as a best practice, employers should be updating their employee handbook every year. But under this new NLRB decision, there are some specific tweaks that we're now making to those handbooks as far as confidentiality, social media, those types of employer policies. And basically the NLRB said, under the NLRA, employees have a right to discuss the terms and conditions of their employment. They can discuss their wages with fellow coworkers or other people. And so if you have these really broad provisions in your handbook that basically say, you are not allowed to discuss any of the terms of your employment or your wages, or you can never say anything bad about our company on your social media, those are so broad that the NLRB has said those violate the NLRA. And so we're really at a point where we need to take a look at those handbook policies for employers. We need to kind of be tweaking that language to make sure that it complies. And then the other decision that came out has to do with severance agreements. And so kind of along the same lines, they basically said if you have a severance agreement that has these very broad confidentiality and non-disparagement provisions. So if you're restricting the employee from ever saying anything bad about the company, that's way too broad. You have to dial that language back some. And we can still put those protections in severance agreements. We can tweak that language. But, if employers are using a template agreement, it's time to update those as well.
Katie, I'm going to get you out of here on this. Haynsworth Sinkler Boyd, you all produce a blog that provides a lot of information for employees and HR teams. And let's see, it is scemployersblog.com. Makes sense. Tell us about it.
Yes, so we push out regular updates through our blog. So many of these rules that we've talked about today, when those final rules come out, we push out those updates to kind of keep people up to date. And then we also have free monthly webinars for anyone to access. We actually have one coming up. They're usually the last week of the month. And so we push out information on our blog about those as well.
I would assume if they go to your website, they can find information on how to subscribe to that blog.
Yes, they can.
Thank you. Katie, I appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You are welcome, folks. That is Katie Busbee. She is with Haynsworth Sinkler Boyd. Don't go anywhere. We're going to take just a quick 60-second break, and we will be back with the rest of the episode. See you in a sec.
I bet you want a website that drums up business. You see, every business wants to have an effective online presence that helps their business grow. We guide you through our process that will drive results by clarifying your message with a beautiful design that's strategically optimized for search. Stop wasting your time and money on an ineffective website and let us help you drum up business by designing a website that speaks to your audience and delivers results.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Let's Talk Business South Carolina, episode number 28. I am your host, Rick Jenkins, and as always, we are coming to you from the Drum Creative Studios. Today, we are talking about workplace trends and all that entails. We're talking about workforce shortages, labor shortages, and all the other things that are occurring, a skills gap. We have to change the way that we are recruiting executives these days. And here to help me have this conversation is Elizabeth Latham. Elizabeth is the Director of Virtual Recruitment for Malone Staffing Solutions. And welcome to the show, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Rick. Very excited to be here today.
Well, you are coming to us obviously virtually, which works out with your title real good, Director of Virtual Recruitment. And
Right.
so you can hear me fine. I see you fine. Folks, we might have a little bit of delay in the conversation today, but Elizabeth and I will work through it. Elizabeth, before we get into the conversation too deep, you work for Malone Workforce Solutions. Tell me a little bit about them.
Absolutely. So Malone Workforce Solutions, we're a staffing and recruiting firm. We were founded in 1969 here in Louisville, Kentucky, which is actually where I am today. And we were actually founded as an executive search recruiting firm. Joe Malone, our founder, started the company, and then in the late 80s, early 90s, his two sons joined the industry. And really at that point, that's where we picked up that temporary temp to hire model. So the business has evolved. And at this point today, we actually have a number of different verticals. I would say, Rick, our bread and butter is still our light industrial commercial staffing division. We also have a professional or executive search recruiting team. We have a very large presence in the healthcare space. We have a healthcare vertical, along with the RPO space, home care, and a couple others. So we do workforce solutions for clients all across the country.
Got it. Thanks for sharing. Okay. Are you ready to talk business?
Let's talk business.
Let's talk business. Workforce trends, they are impacted by all types of factors. There are a few that are especially important today. You know, and I'm going to start out with COVID. Even though COVID came almost 4 years ago, this is February when this airs, and of course COVID hit in March of 2020, so we are 4 years removed from COVID. But in the wake of COVID, the year after in 2021, 50 million people quit their jobs in the United States. And what do you know, the next year, another 50 million quit their jobs, and it was called the Great Resignation. And of course, we are kind of doing a reset now between employer and employees. It's kind of like a relationship reset of sorts, and we're trying to get back to normal. But because of all those people that quit, we continue to have labor shortages. What are you seeing out there, Elizabeth?
It's no surprise to everyone that's listening that there is a huge labor shortage in the United States. The last I read, which was just a couple, maybe last month, in the U.S., we have 9.5 million unfilled jobs. And when you look at the number of unfilled people, Rick, there's only about 6.5. So there's a gap of about 3 million people if every unfilled position was filled by one of those unemployed people. And that's scary to think about that, because that's a big gap. What's even scarier is it's gotten so much better since the pandemic. I think the labor trends are never going to look the same because of the effects of COVID-19, but we're specifically seeing some industries that were really impacted the most by it. And a lot of the clients that we support live in these industries. So I think specifically about the manufacturing space, it was extremely, and still continues to be extremely affected by the work shortage. You think about hospitality, retail, healthcare. It seems like it's the norm now, which is unfortunate, that when, businesses have to close early or change their hours because of labor shortages. And I don't think that's ever going to go away.
Well, you mentioned two industries that, of course, are of special interest here in South Carolina, and that's the hospitality industry and the manufacturing industry. And yeah, we in South Carolina, of course, as you know, we've been dealing with those issues for quite some time. We need folks in our manufacturing facilities. We got jobs, and not only do we have jobs, but they pay well too, but we can't seem to fill them. Do people not just want to work, Elizabeth? What is it?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that the labor participation is so different than what it looked like before the pandemic. So to put that into perspective, we were sitting at about 68, 69% labor participation across the country. And we're still right now about 63%. And a lot of that was really impacted due to the large number of baby boomers that went into early retirement due to the pandemic. So maybe they weren't quite there yet, right? But the pandemic forced them to go into retirement a little bit early. I actually read a statistic the other day that was really alarming that, let's see, they're coining this term peak 65. And what that means is that in the year 2024, we're projected to hit this, where more Americans will turn 65 years old in the year 2024 than any other time in history. And with that, about 10,000 baby boomers reach retirement age every single day. So as they exit the workforce naturally, there's not enough people to backfill them. The population isn't growing like it did then. So you've got a huge gap in that space, which I think is a big contributor.
You talk about a huge gap in that space, which brings me to the next topic of conversation, and that is the skills gap. And a labor shortage and skills gap, they're similar, but they are different animals altogether. And the skills gap can be resolved, or at least partially, through continuing education programs. But it means that retention efforts within this industry are more important than ever before. Yes?
Absolutely. Retention is something that companies really need to keep an eye on and monitor very closely. Another thing I would tell you, Rick, about the skills gap that I think is a big miss that I see across organizations right now is that the employers that are doing training it's really all about upskilling and training your current workforce. And I feel like companies that get that right are positioning themselves to go into, the future decades so well. But I look specifically at skilled trade positions. So, for example, we have a client in a very rural part of Indiana that employs welders. And welders are one of those skilled trades that we are a huge shortage of welders. If I had to say on my hand a couple different positions that every industry, or that I feel like every manufacturing company needs, welders is one of them. And what this company has done that I think is brilliant is they've decided to invest in their current workforce, and they have created a lab there on site where they can train people that are interested in the welding profession and really help to upskill that team of people. And a lot of leaders, I think, struggle with that because it happens on the clock, right? So they're missing productivity from these employees as they're training. But I think the people that do it well do it beautifully because they're really able to invest in their people. And programs like that are critical because there is going to be a huge skills gap within the next couple of years.
Yes, there is. You're exactly right, and it's going to continue for a while. And listening to you talk about how many people are retiring and all of that makes me realize that we are in this for the long haul. We talked about COVID for a second. Let's go back to it for a second. So when COVID hit, a lot of people decided, you know what, I want to work from home, and if you won't let me work from home, then I'll just quit, right? And as time has gone on, that, as I mentioned, has circled back a little bit. I said that employers had the leverage for a while, and then employees now, or at some point, began to have a little bit more of the leverage. And now it's got somewhat of a reset. It is circling back. Are we continuing to see, and I'm assuming that more and more people are coming back from the extreme to more of a hybrid work schedule and maybe even into the office at all? What are you seeing out there? That's
exactly what I was going to say. If you look at the battle that we've seen over the last 4 years when it comes to return to office and it comes to working in office, the clear winner is hybrid work. So what's interesting is 90% of companies say that they will do some type of a return to office mandate this year. But what I think is interesting is the way that we define return to office has really shifted. So return to office now doesn't mean you're in your desk at a corporate facility, 40 hours a week, 5 days a week. Return to office now to employers means maybe that's 3 or 4 days per week, or maybe that's 1 week per month. So it really looks very, very different depending on where you are. And what's interesting, I read a statistic the other day that 40% of Americans have the ability to work from home at least 1 day per week. So I think that is, I thought that was high, but that's where we are.
One thing has changed, and you allude to it there, is the way we have to attract people, the way we have to recruit people these days. And, it is no more evident than in your title, Director of Virtual Recruitment. Tell me what that means, first of all, and then also share with us the different strategies we have to use these days.
It's interesting because when I first came into the staffing and recruiting industry about 6 or 7 years ago, my colleagues that had been in the industry a long time told me that the way of recruiting was to open a job posting in the newspaper, and then candidates would apply and bring their resume in. And that obviously seems very dated, right? We both know that. I would argue, Rick, that the days of posting a job on a job board and waiting for applicants to apply on the job board is also very, very dated. So there's a lot of different ways that companies can recruit talent, but because we have such a shortage in the labor pool right now, companies have to get super creative and have a very, very strategic plan when it comes to recruiting. And that plan involves working with analytics to make sure that you're attracting the right kind of candidates. Analytics is a piece that I think is really important. And there's a lot of different ways that you can spend money on advertising right now. And it looks very different than what it did look like. But the companies that are doing it really well and having success, when you look at a virtual recruitment plan, what they're doing is they're really analyzing, where do our best candidates come from? So if I post an ad on this platform, how many people look at it? And then we go further, how many people actually click on it, right? They call that the click-through rate. Then you go further, how many actually applied? The ones that didn't apply, where did that drop off, right? Where do we need to tweak our job description? Or is there something that's holding people from actually applying to it? And then you could go down the funnel to actually where are our best candidates that stay long-term. And you talked about retention, Rec, like where do those candidates come from? And you'd be very surprised because oftentimes they don't come from the Indeeds and the Glassdoors and the Google advertisements. Oftentimes they come from places like TikTok. Because your employees are on TikTok, right? And if they see your ads, they'll often apply to it that way.
Artificial intelligence. How is AI becoming a part of talent acquisition these days?
I'm really excited about AI. AI has been the topic of conversation in almost every conference and roundtable that I've sat on. And actually yesterday, we met with one of our interns that did a project over the summer. And the project was trying to understand how quickly do employers need to connect with candidates once they apply in order to capture that candidate. And what was interesting as we looked at the data was that over 45% of employers never even connected with candidates that applied to the position. So we're saying that there's a labor shortage, but then we're having 45% of employers that don't actually even respond to the candidates. And a lot of that's a bandwidth issue. HR teams have been completely overworked for the last 4 years, right? Because of all of the challenges that we've experienced with COVID. But when I think about AI and how that could solution that problem, and we could have, and this is happening now, but these companies could have technology that engages with the candidates, engages with them quickly, screens them, assesses them, sends them different assessments, schedules them for interviews, gets them to come into the office for an actual interview. So all of those things that are very labor-intensive administrative type task, right? How could that help in the world of talent acquisition? I also think through the way that AI technology can analyze data. So we've seen a lot of that come through, help us with job postings. It's going to be an exciting trend to keep an eye on because I think it's going to be something that continues to evolve and help our recruiters be much more efficient at their daily jobs.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I agree also that it is exciting, but I'd be lying if I didn't say it scares me just a little bit, to think about some of the challenges also that AI brings to the table. Elizabeth, I'm going to get you out of here on this. I want you to look into your crystal ball and tell me, in 2025 or down the road a little bit, what are the challenges going to be?
We touched on it earlier, Rick, but I really think skilled trade is the biggest challenge that we're going to continue to run into. I think that, me saying earlier that I don't know if I mentioned this to you or not, but a third of the workforce in manufacturing, 1/3 of the current workforce is over the age of 55 years old right now. And those are not your, those are your tool and die operators. Those are your CNC machinists. Those are the folks that work these skilled trades. And I think that a lot of organizations, most of the organizations, don't have a plan to replace those folks. And I think that that's going to cause a huge crisis when it comes to skilled trade within the next year. Hopefully we can use some AI technology to help with that, but I think it is going to be a very big problem.
Elizabeth, great stuff. I appreciate you joining the show.
Thank you, Rick.
You are welcome. Folks, that is Elizabeth Latham. She is the Director of Virtual Recruitment for Malone Workforce Solutions. Don't want you to go anywhere. We'll be right back in about 60 seconds.
I bet you want a website that drums up business. You see, every business wants to have an effective online presence that helps their business grow. We guide you through our process that will drive results by clarifying your message with a beautiful design that's strategically optimized for search. Stop wasting your time and money on an ineffective website and let us help you drum up business by designing a website that speaks to your audience and delivers results.
Welcome back, everyone, to episode number 28 of Let's Talk Business South Carolina. I am glad you are joining us. At the top of the segment, we were talking about a variety of workplace trends. And one of those trends, of course, that has plagued us here, well, it plagues every state, but sometimes it's a little more obvious to us in South Carolina because of the manufacturing industry, but it is a labor shortage and a skills gap. And when you have a labor shortage, one of the most important things that you have to deal with is making sure that you retain what you have, because it's not always easy to replace. And our next two guests, we're going to talk about that today, how they have been working together to retain some staffing and some employees and have had a lot of success doing it. I've got two folks with me here today. First of all, we've got Todd White. He is the Vice President of Operations for HTI, and they are Human Technologies Incorporated, and we have Lori Morgan. Lori is the Human Resources Director for the U.S. Big job for Draexlmaier. Welcome, guys.
Thank you, absolutely.
It is good to have you here. And we have already been talking to a couple folks in your all's industry. My goodness, what a roller coaster ride it has been for the staffing industry. Sure. And I said at the top of the show that when COVID hit, COVID impacted everyone in one way or another, both at work and at home. And for those of us at work, it impacted pretty much every industry, which means that your industry, the staffing world, and of course you do way more than staffing, I understand that, but it impacted you all because everybody you deal with was impacted in different ways, and so you have to deal with it across the board. And so I've been aware of that as I have talked to folks in your all's industry over the course of the last year or so. Okay, let's get to it. We're going to start with you, Todd. You work for HTI. How long have you been there?
I've been with HTI going on 14 years.
14 years, and tell us a little bit about HTI.
So HTI, we're a full-service HR services firm, ranging anywhere from light industrial recruiting all the way through professional skilled hourly recruiting. We do project management, so outsourced manufacturing opportunities, and then also any kind of fractional HR, consulting, HR support as well.
Right. And Draexlmaier, Lori, Draexlmaier, where are y'all located? Duncan?
We're in Duncan.
You're located in Duncan, and tell us about Draexlmaier.
So Draexlmaier is a Tier 1 automotive supplier in the premium automotive segment. Yeah. We have 13 locations, manufacturing locations in North America. We have 2 main plants in the U.S., manufacturing plants, and then we have other support functions across the U.S. as well.
Headquartered in Germany?
We're headquartered in Busbee, Germany.
Okay. Yes. You get to Germany often?
About once a year.
Okay. All right. And you got a big job. You are the Director of Human Resources for the entire U.S. Big job, right?
Yes.
How many employees again in the United States?
We have about 1,500 in the U.S.
Okay.
And then I'm responsible for compensation and benefits for the North American region, where we have about 22,000.
Wonderful. Okay. So we've got two people that are well-versed and well prepared to talk about retention in the workplace. Okay, you guys started working together about a decade ago.
Yep.
At some point, Lori, did you, well, first of all, were you with Draexlmaier, 10 years ago?
No, I've been there for about 7 years.
Okay.
HTI was already one of our providers when I came on board. We had 2 at that point.
Okay. You went to HTI, of Draexlmaier went to HTI a decade ago, and what did that relationship look like? I realize you weren't there, but you're probably aware. What did that relationship look like in the very beginning?
So we had some struggles with other staffing providers. Mm-hmm. So we decided to split the business and give part of our business to one supplier, part of our business to another supplier, in order to sort of cover ourselves and see which provider stood out and gave us the best service. And Of course, very shortly after I came on board, it was clear that HTI was our primary provider, and then we made them our sole provider.
Gotcha. So when you came on board, that decision still had to be made, and you made that decision. You said it was split. How was it split? What was on? What went to this vendor? What went to that vendor? How'd that work?
We split it between logistics and production. So our logistics, forklift drivers, material handlers went to one provider, and our production operators went to another.
Right. And Todd, were you and how long have you been involved with Draexlmaier?
In some form or fashion since we executed the contract.
Since the very beginning. Yep. Okay. And from your perspective, what did that relationship look like a decade ago?
Yeah, I mean, no different than typical transactions when we get into a new relationship. There were certainly some needs there that we felt like we could adjust and come to a better alignment on. Really it boiled down to, it was somewhat of controlled chaos going on, bodies being slung into roles, not really keeping up with it from an employee relations perspective. And so when you have those two dynamics factoring into your staffing of your organization, widgets aren't getting out the door appropriately, right? And so it really was coming in. We're a very process-oriented organization, so we have a very scientific approach to how we take over these transitions. We integrate within our client bases, and then we really get to a stabilization perspective and then start towards the CIP of what that relationship looks like going forward.
CIP.
Continuous improvement.
So Draexlmaier, Lori said 1,500 employees locally or in the United States. 1,500. So a large company.
Sure.
And you said that they were in dire need of some organizational assistance at that point. So how do you wrap your brain around trying to corral 1,500 employees that are spread across the United States, and what does that look like?
Yeah, I guess for clarifications, we're not necessarily responsible for the entire footprint of Draexlmaier, right? And so when we came into Draexlmaier, it was really a little over 100 employees that through a contract perspective that we were responsible for. So we're a percentage of their population at the Duncan facility. And really, you look at how can we get a better applicant flow, applicant experience. What does our onboarding look like compared to what is happening now alongside of Draexlmaier? And then to your point, it really then becomes, okay, we've got good processes in place. We understand Draexlmaier's needs, what their jobs look like. We're very good at getting applicants in, but now the partnership, right? Because it takes both sides of a partnership to keep those employees engaged, happy, and in the doors once you get them there, right? So then it really becomes the maintenance side of it really becomes never getting complacent on what you're doing on the turnover perspective.
Before once COVID hit, we kind of know what some of the problems were that we all had to deal with. But before COVID hit, if you were 10 years in the relationship and COVID hit 4 years ago come March, you were 6 years into it at that point. You had come just a few years before that. What are the types, Lori, the types of struggles that you were asking HDI to help with aside from retention issues?
Yeah, so retention, of course, is number one.
Of course.
We were very impressed with HTI's ability to help us qualify and certify forklift drivers. Not a lot of other agencies are able to take care of that, but it was very important for us that we maintain safety above all else. HTI has an excellent forklift certification program, so when they bring our forklift drivers in, we are assured that they're safe, qualified drivers, and that they can help us maintain our safety record.
Right. We were talking before this episode a few days ago. We were having a conversation, and I remember, and I don't know who said it was one of you, but said that, you tried all kinds of things over the course of time, and sometimes things worked and sometimes things didn't. And when they didn't, we did what we all, that word that came into our lexicon with COVID, we pivoted and we did something else. Lori, talk about some of the things that worked or didn't work a little bit, please.
One of the things that you mentioned is the Great Resignation.
Yeah.
And we faced that as well. Sure. And so when we took a look with HTI, where are people going? Why are people leaving, and what are they doing now? Because they have to work in some form or fashion in order to support their families. So we noticed that a lot of people were entering this gig work for Instacart, DoorDash, Uber, those kinds of things where they could pick the hours that they wanted to work. So with HTI, HTI developed an app that would allow us to take certain parts of our business and allow people to choose the hours that they wanted to work. Unfortunately, it was only a very small part of our business that we could do that with because we are a direct supplier to an OEM who requires hourly deliveries. Right. So it didn't work, but it was an opportunity for us to try. And we did try it and gave it a good shot. Sure. Doesn't mean it doesn't work for everybody, but it just did not work for us.
And you said OEM, that OEM is BMW?
Yes.
And OEM, original equipment manufacturer. Laura, you talk about sometimes things don't work. I do know that sometimes when a client is dealing with a vendor and things don't work, they just tell the vendor to hit the road. But for you guys, it's not work like that. You have said that you all were a true partner in this, and that probably it has stood the test of the time. If you had made a change in the beginning, then you might not be where you are today.
That's exactly right.
All right. So you are a multinational company. We talked before we came on the air here. 23 different countries are represented on your staff. Is that correct?
That's right.
And you've got a large contingent from which countries?
We have a large contingency from Ukraine and Russia. Also, other countries and other pockets, but this in particular seems to be a niche for us.
And why is that?
I'm not sure. We have many that have been there for 15 plus years since almost the inception of the plant. But it seems that they have gravitated to us, and it has worked out quite well.
Right. Have you proactively, for one reason or another, reached out to those nationalities in particular for one reason? Is it because you've had, you know that culture works well within this culture or with what you're doing within the workplace? Is there a reason for that?
Yeah, it seems that they are adaptable to the work that we have. Yeah. They enjoy the work, and the retention rate is extremely high. Right. So when we decided to look for another option of where we could find additional pools of talent, we sat down with HTI and said, this is something we would like to try. Okay. We brainstormed some ideas of how we could reach this population, and HTI went to work and found that population for us.
That is the relationship that I'm interested in talking about today. And so, with all of that the conversation that we've had so far, setting us up for where we are right now. And so, Todd, HTI and Draexlmaier, longtime partnership. Now you've got a retention effort, because I can imagine that bringing folks in from outside the United States, you've got to incorporate them into the culture. And I would assume that you all have been very involved in that. Tell us how you all went about.
Sure. Yeah, and just to add a little bit to Lori, when you look at different staffing models related to population within your facility, sometimes they're very strategic and targeted. This just happened to be something that, as we've been coming out of the nightmare that was COVID and really starting to look at the data within the facility and seeing what was working, who wasn't working, we really kind of honed in on this natural population that was just kind of organically happening within the facility. And it was very clear on a data point that there's some success there. And so we really leaned into that, right? And really started developing good communication with the existing population within the site. How do we reach out to the rest of the community? How can you guys help support that? It really just naturally our applicant population just kept increasing there, and then we kind of went through the lifespan of what it looks like to incorporate this. And the first question, especially in a manufacturing setting where you've got very controlled quality processes, safety is paramount. You've got a lot of forklift traffic. You got a lot of lights and sirens and training documents. How do we incorporate a population into the site that all of our training documents, all of our whistles and bells, everything is in English? How do we make sure that, one, they've got the skill set and the knowledge to build a quality product, but then most importantly, how do we keep them safe while we're doing that? And so then it started coming to how do we as a partnership make sure that all these documents and communication are in place. And then looking at our population and also say, okay, who has some leadership abilities, who's kind of stepping up within this certain population, and let's give them a pathway through development, through a leadership standpoint that can be a kind of a point of contact, a liaison, a shift supervisor, whatever it may be in the future. And we were able to find a couple of those candidates, and we brought them along, and they're HTI's account management team's right-hand men and women when it comes to communicating and moving along in this relationship as far as Ukrainian-Russian populations.
Lori, to what degree was there a language barrier?
There obviously was. Initially from onboarding, just how to get around in the plant, how do we communicate.
Did they speak English? Some of them did.
Some of them did. Some of them did speak English, and some of them spoke no English. And so we had that challenge initially of how do we even communicate our documentation? How do we communicate how to walk around through the plant safely? And so, like Todd said, we were able to identify a couple of key people with their organization. We have some in our organization as well who've worked up through the ranks and have management positions and are able to help translate. But we were able, between HTI and our people, we were able to help translate the documents, the training, the onboarding, so that they understood.
I'm curious, why would you hire employees that did not speak the language?
So when we looked at our data, the retention rate that we have, now we have a couple of other populations of employees who do not speak English that are not Russian or Ukrainian, but the retention rate for non-English speaking employees is extremely high, like 98%.
Wow.
So they don't like to change jobs a lot. They're appreciative of the opportunity and welcome the work and welcome the opportunity, so they stay with us. And they do great work.
Do you require them to learn English once they get here?
We have done that in the past. We have held some classes in the past for not English as a second language. We are going to do that again so that they have the opportunity to come in and learn English if they want, but it's not a requirement.
It's not a requirement.
No.
So that means then that you probably have to rely, as you alluded to current employees to help with that language barrier and translate and all that.
Well, it's interesting because as the workforce has come in through HTI, they have learned where the populations of other Ukrainians, for example, we have quite a few in injection molding, and they will request a job in injection molding so that they can be with others who speak their language, and it makes the work much easier for them.
So Todd, Lori decides, you know what, we have great retention rates, with the Russian contingent or the Ukrainian contingency, and that's who we want to hire. That is a tall task, I would think. You said that you went directly to some of the folks who were already there that were from there, and of course I'm sure they helped. But how do you even go about beginning that process? I wouldn't know what to do.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly, especially with the conflict going on currently in Ukraine, there's a lot of government support. Depending on what state is the level of support, but there's certainly a lot of activity when it comes to refugees. And so researching that, what does that look like? What's the assistance there? Kind of where are the refugees kind of being housed and moved towards? But really, you don't try to recreate their wheel, and you don't try to be the expert when you already have the experts, right? And so kind of related to our relationship as Draexlmaier and HTI is Lori's team. They don't try to reinvent the wheel on recruiting and staffing because that's what they trust us for, right? So they lean into us and say, okay, what do we need to do? We do the same thing with the Ukrainian speaking and the Russian speaking and the Hispanic speaking populations that we deal with. Is we learn from them. It sounds simple, but you go to the source and you have conversations, and some of those conversations can be difficult, so you got to figure out how you communicate, right? Who is bilingual, who's not. But then where you guys commuting from, what are you looking for in a job, and you just lean into it, you put your marketing towards it, and really word of mouth is extremely powerful when you're talking about the recruiting side. The recruiting side of it's easy. Okay, we've got applicants, they're interested, they're capable of doing this job, but now do we have the processes, the structure, and the emphasis on making sure that they can be safe and they can perform well? And that goes into, okay, do we have leadership that can communicate, right? And then does our upper management team, do they understand the levels of communication within that population? And do our training documents support them to reference? And do they understand forklift safety that isn't necessarily in their language, and building infrastructure in place that's the legwork that has to be done between the partnership.
You said it sounds simple, but it does not sound simple. It sounds like an incredible challenge that it appears that HTI has risen to meet. Lori, I got to ask, I'm curious, given the conflict, of course, that is going on over there, as you talked about, Todd, has there been problems in the factory between the two factories? None at all. No. None at all.
We do not involve politics in work. When we come to work, we come to work. Right. And that's it.
Right. It's actually pretty amazing that it's kind of, when the situation that we're in and the program that we have at Draexlmaier, it really is, that's the mission, right? It's regardless of your nationality and where you come from, when you get inside of four walls and you kind of got the same mission at hand every day, you don't really have time nor the interest to even talk about it, right? What do we need to do to do this well, do this safely, get home to our families?
Understood. What do you, anything else you guys are working on now or have plans to work on as we get down the road a little bit? Yeah,
I mean, what I would say, we talked about, before the episode, prior to COVID, we were always a partnership that always looked for opportunities like this, and we were very strategic in what we were doing. We were very open and honest about what our metrics said that we were doing, how our retention rates, how our staffing rates were. But I would say that we've kind of come full circle. We're no different than any of our relationships or any employers for that matter. For the last couple of years, everything kind of went out the window when you talked about strategy, right? It was all about survival and having people in your doors for as many hours as you possibly could to build as many parts, and all the white noise that we used to focus on that were productive, right? Like retention strategies and recruitment strategies and employee engagement. They were still present, but they were harder to look at, and they weren't the priority. The priority was make sure the plant is running. Right. And I would say over the last 12 months or so, we really, Lori and plant management and HTI, we got to the point early last year was, okay, we're tired of talking about COVID. We're tired of just constantly talking about why people aren't staying and just accepting that that's a part of where we are. And let's get back to looking at how we improve ourselves, how we hold ourselves to a higher standard. And the data supports itself that, we've all but cut our turnover on a monthly standpoint, at least in the contingent workforce, by 50% over the last year. And so to answer your question, who knows? We are, when you sit in our meetings and you hear our discussions, sometimes it's very proactive and here's our solution that we recommend, but really it's a partnership that we come in, we let the data speak for itself, we let the situation speak, and then it is a partnership that says, okay, where do we go, right? And we're very good at being problem solvers together, and both of us bringing ideas and figuring out a way to implement. So who knows where we'll go from here, but we know that it's going to be focused on employee engagement and retention.
Lori, last thoughts?
Yeah, I was smiling when Todd was talking because I think he's probably looking at me saying, it depends on what her next crazy idea is.
Of course. Of course.
But they've always been very open to that. And it's not unusual for me to give them a call and say, hey, have you thought about this? What if we try this? Or saying, they can call me and say, would you be willing to try that? Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Even a talk show. Willing and able.
Even a podcast, yes.
Well, you cannot end it any better than that, folks. Appreciate you guys being here. Folks, that is Todd White. He's Vice President of Operations for HTI, or Human Technologies Incorporated, and Lori Morgan, Director of Human Resources for the U.S. for Draexlmaier. Thanks for joining us on another episode of Let's Talk Business South Carolina. We'll see you next time.